McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have you along as well. Today is April 10th, Monday, April 10th, 2023. And I'm pleased to have a special guest today, Dr. Jeff Menzise. He's a scholar, a professor. He's a graduate of Fisk and Howard. He currently is a professor at Morgan State and a former assistant director of the Race Relations Institute at Fisk University. His background is in clinical psychology, teaching theories of personality at Morgan. Today, we want to talk about the Tennessee Three. That's what's on my mind, probably on your mind, should be on all of our minds. And we want to unpack. We think that there are many, many teachable moments about the expulsion of two Black legislators, one from Nashville and one from Memphis, by the Tennessee legislature around their protests, their involvement in creating voice for people that are concerned about gun violence and the availability of guns. They challenged the determination of the Republican-led legislature to suppress, to deny, to not hear any discussion about gun violence and gun control and the topic that was so aggrieving not only the people in Nashville, but the nation as well. Well, teachable moment, there's the question of gun control itself, availability of the kinds of guns that aren't for hunting, that people are using to hunt people and kill people in mass killings around the country. Of course, another mass incident today. We'll maybe get into that as well. And then there's the question of Black people working in an institution like the Tennessee State Legislature, where it seems the veneer of civility really doesn't apply to Black people. They charged and denied the two Black legislators on the grounds that their actions broke the decorum, the civility of the procedure of governance in that state. But the truth of the matter, from our point of view, is that they simply revealed a clannish mentality, white supremacist thought, and a raw demonstration of white power. Well, let's talk about all of that. Brother, Dr. Menzise, good to see you. Welcome to the conversation.
Hey, Mr. Al, how's it going, brother?
Going good, man. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Likewise. First impressions, when you watched this thing unfold in Tennessee with the Tennessee Three, what were your first thoughts?
Yeah, when I initially saw what was taking place, one, I thought, well, this is part of the course. I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, the first thing that I saw was the actual protest. They had all the children up at the top, and the two of the Tennessee Three I recognized being on the floor, the two brothers, the two Justins actually, which is ironic. Both named Justin, which is justice if you look at it really. But I thought it was very ironic, But when I first saw the protest taking place, of course, understanding the system of racism, white supremacy the way that I do, I first cringed. I said, "Ugh." The brothers that were there with the bullhorns, making some noise and causing what some people are calling good trouble, to borrow from that phrase. But then also, like I was saying, understanding the system the way that I do, I knew that there was going to be backlash. And I knew that these brothers were going to face some repercussions for these particular actions. And, so I just sat back and I watched it. And when they had the three go up for expulsion and two were expelled, and one of the kids is not like the others was not, forgive me, I'm not demeaning the representative by saying the kids, but the phrase from the old school song, one of these kids is not like the others, but no disrespect to her at all. It didn't surprise me. I actually expected that. And so I just wish that, I talk to the TV a lot when I'm watching TV. And so I was really hoping that the brothers could hear me. I was talking to Justin and Justin, man. I was like, come on, reps. Y'all got to do better than this. They're going to get you for this, man. And I'm not saying to, shy away and be cowardice and, tucking your tail and stuff. But, you got to understand the terrain that you're walking in. And you got to understand the battlefield that you're on. And the fact that you're on a battlefield and there's a war that's been waged and it's been ongoing for a long, long time. And if we can't approach these things more strategically, we miss something. We miss something big time for all these years that our elders and our ancestors have been sacrificing on our behalf.
Let me give some background. I got a story that appeared on CBS this morning. It's a story, I think the author of it is Carrie Breen. And I'll just read a couple of paragraphs of it. It says, controversy has surrounded the vote by Tennessee lawmakers to expel from the state legislature, to expel 2 members from the state legislature after they and a 3rd member, all Democrats, took part in a protest against gun violence from the floor of the chamber. The votes held on Thursday, April 6th, resulted in Justin Jones and Justin Pearson being expelled from the Tennessee House of Representatives, while Gloria Johnson kept her seat by 1 vote. Vice President Kamala Harris headed to Nashville to meet with them on Friday, and President Biden spoke with the 3 via conference call and invited them to visit the White House. It goes on to list what you need to know. And, the story says what led to the expulsion of the 2 legislators. And it goes on to talk about, their personal stories. Who is Justin Jones? It says that Justin Jones, 27, was the first of the Tennessee 3 to be expelled from the House by a vote of 72 to 25. He'd been one of the youngest members of the legislature and represented the state's 52nd district, which has about 70,000 residents and is part of Davison County, the Nashville metro area. They say his photo and bio have been removed from the Tennessee General Assembly's website, but on his campaign website, Jones describes himself as a Nashville activist and community organizer. And then Justin Pearson, 28, 2nd member of the group to be expelled, another of the legislature's youngest members, elected in January of 23 in a special election after the incumbent, Barbara Cooper, had died. He represented the state's 86th district, which has about 64,000 residents, and is part of Shelby County, where Memphis is located. Same thing, his picture and information taken down, but like his colleague, he says he is a community leader and an advocate. The vote to expel him was 69 to 26. Well, let's stop there and pick up on the note earlier that Kamala Harris showed up. Got a clip of her talking. Let's watch that and then come back and jump in the conversation some more.
That is not a democracy. You can't walk around with your lapel pin and you're not representing the values that we hold dear as Americans. You can't walk around and talk about protocol. Protocol and procedures were devised to require and allow and encourage debate and discussion and, yes, dissension. But these so-called leaders tried to shut it down instead. But we're not having that.
Okay, Kamala Harris is on the case there. And as we said, they've been invited, had a phone call from President Biden, invited to the White House. Let's unpack what we've known or seen so far. Dr. Jeff Menzise, what are your impressions?
Yeah, well, one is really, it was really good to see the Fisk University chapel again, man. I spent many and many days in that chapel. No, I mean, it's a really sacred place. A lot of great speakers have come through there. I mean, include, MLK. I mean, we've had a lot of giants to come to Fisk campus. The culture at Fisk University is one of social justice. It always has been. I mean, from the first group of Jubilee singers, making that self-sacrifice in service of the greater good. And so this is well within the tradition. And it's just, I love to see it. I love to see that our current student population is still encouraged, that our more recent graduates like Justin Jones are still making these same, carrying on tradition as we do. But it's beautiful to see that. And I was glad to hear that the vice president was coming to campus, one, because it would elevate our university as one that is rooted in social activism. And so, I was really enjoying that. One of the things, as we talk about this story, when we talk about the 3 representatives, 2 of which were expelled and 1 that was not, when you dig down into the reasoning, that the Republicans on the floor gave for voting to expel the 2, it was almost technicalities. And so, one thing that I would challenge and push back on Madam Vice is that it was a democracy. They did actually vote, and the majority won. And they did it based on technicalities. And if you look at the stories that were being told, for example, there was a story by, it was one of the lawmakers, look at it really, I'm sorry, Jody Barrett, Representative Jody Barrett, talked about why their vote went the way that it did. And what you'll find is that they did not, according to Barrett, did not expel Representative Johnson. One, because she did not participate in some of the more egregious acts, or the quote unquote egregious acts on the floor. The passing back and forth of the bullhorn, the going back and forth up and down the steps in and out of the chamber, to go up to where the citizens were protesting. And I think it's really that microphone, the bullhorn piece, entering the chambers, entering the House well without greeting the speaker. Those are violations. Not waiting to be recognized before you start speaking. Those are like technicalities and violations that they actually got Justin Pearson and Justin Jones on. And here's the other kicker that I read in the same article, is that Representative Johnson, actually showed up with legal representation when she came for hers. See, the rules are different. That's one of my favorite hashtags. Hashtag the rules different. And it's because the game is played differently by different people based on what they recognize about the game that they're playing. And I just think that Representative Justin Jones and Representative Justin Pearson were former representatives. They didn't understand the game that they were playing. Representative Johnson did, though. She came with her legal aid and her attorney, and her attorney said, technicalities. What you were saying she did not do. Look at the video. She didn't do this. She didn't do that. She got off because of that, and in part because of that. You cannot ignore the race factor in this as well. The fact that she's a white woman. She said that herself. But of course, they're pushing back and saying it was nothing to do with that. But when you look at these 3, standing up, yes, but you've got to know the rules of the game that you're playing. I mean, like I say, Brother Jones, it hurt my heart when I realized that he didn't even make it 3 months.
Yeah, brand new.
Make it 3 months. And it's one thing to be disruptive. It's one thing to get into quote unquote good trouble. But it doesn't really help the cause if you run in head first into a minefield and not paying attention to where you are. Now, if all of this was planned, if he planned to get kicked out in 3 months to make noise and bring spotlight to greater issues, perfectly okay. One of my elders, Dick Gregory, he told me that the only smart people in jail are the ones that intended to be there. And I know that, Brother Jones, he has been arrested several times protesting, and it was intentional, right? And so I'm just really hoping that this was part of the strategy and part of the plan, and he didn't just get caught slipping. Because one thing I know that we need to dial back a bit of our emotionality. Being a clinician, having worked as a clinician and a doctor of clinical psychology, I'm looking at this from various angles. I'm looking at it emotionally. I'm looking at it, of course, how behaviors manifest. I'm looking at it from motivational perspectives and definitely strategically. And I'm understanding that we've got to come up with a new strategy for how to address racial injustice, especially when we get into positions of power, to where we actually have the ability to make change from the inside,
How many other members are there in the legislature who are Black or people of color? Do you know the number?
I don't know the number nor the percentage of that, but I'm sure it's relatively small. Relatively small.
And I wonder how, if there's a generational divide between these new young activists, self-described activists, and those who are older and more seasoned. I did see, I think the Speaker or of the House or someone who was white in the legislative body talk about somebody else who he thought modeled the appropriate behavior.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not unlike them to pick out somebody who said, here's your example of how you have to get along. And that also is divisive in its nature as well. But so I'm wondering, what do you see would have been the options? How should they have attacked the problem? The problem is the urgency of people in the community concerned about a state, a community, a nation's inability to move on gun violence, to move towards sensible gun legislation that would protect lives that would probably reduce the availability of high volume weapons. So lay out from your point of view what sets of options they had in the positions of power that they occupied.
Right, right. Yeah. So great question. One of the things is to understand that you've got a lot of citizens standing behind you who can function in ways that you, quote unquote, cannot, because of the oath that you took and the rules that you have agreed to play by. And so one of the things is you allow the citizens that are up there in the balcony to do what they're doing, and to have faith and trust in you that you're going to do what you do within the rules that you have agreed to play by, which is to push this legislation forward. Right. And, it's very important that we also distinguish because there are several things taking place now, at the same time. We've got the issues with them being expelled. That's one issue, and that's separate, even though they're connected and related, but it's a separate issue. You've got the gun legislation issue, which is also on the table, and which is also closely connected to the third point, which is, talking about the murder, of the 3 children and the 3 elders at the school. Right. And so, one of the things also that would show, what I would suggest to be strong and mature leadership would be to make a clear statement that these are separate things. Yes, we got in trouble, quote unquote, for protesting, and trying to push this legislation. But let's keep this going on with us separate from what we're here, the business that we're here to handle. And I think that what happens is that we are often too easily triggered into an emotional uproar. And once you control a person's emotions, man, you've got that person. And one of the things I try to teach, my students and grad students that are going to be clinicians, or when I'm working with clients as a coach or whatever, is emotional control is so important. There's an ancient Egyptian saying that says emotions make poor leaders, but great servants, right? Poor leaders, but great servants. And so if you get yourself under emotional control to where nobody else can poke you and make you scream, make you happy, make you sad, make you angry, then you become a dangerous individual because you're less susceptible to manipulation. And so right now we have been manipulated on the grand scale. We're all up in arms. A Tennessee 3, I mean, they got the catch name phrase now. They got it's all these different things. And if you've been alive long enough, paying attention to political movements and issues long enough, you understand how these things typically go, and this is very much textbook and part of course. But to get directly to your question, you did ask specifically, what could they do from the floor, right, to have navigated it? And I want to, at the risk of sounding like a Monday morning quarterback, right, somebody who's not on the legislative floor, I'm not suited up, it's not what I do. But what I do is I understand people as a clinician and strategy as far as operating within the system of racism and white supremacy. And so one of the things, again, is to trust your citizens, because trust the constituents, trust that they're going to make the noise that they make, and always, always, always keep the rules of engagement in front of you. That's very important because, again, they got hit on technicalities, right? Representative Johnson, she missed it because so for whatever reason, she didn't grab the bullhorn, right? She may have known the rules. She may have known that's going too far. And for whatever reason, she brought her lawyer with her, to the proceedings. The other 2 did not. And so, number one, know the rules of the game, abide by the rules of the game, and never be confused and think that you can do the same thing that they can and get away with it like
they do. Yeah. What were the optics as you watched this? Some people, I think, have talked about these guys are not big guys, tall guys, but Representative Johnson's a statuesque person. So I'm looking at the visual of 2 shorter, small framed men, and this kind of, really, really, really large stature, height wise in particular, and older woman. What's the visual message there?
And so, okay, so now we're digging into the symbolism of it all, which is very important as well. Like you said, optics. If you often notice that oftentimes the 2 justices are flanking her. She's oftentimes centered. And both justices, they both have a lot of hair on their head as well. And so, all of these things are, and they both are similar stature. Sometimes it can look as if they are, when they're holding their hands up, like they're holding her up, because oftentimes in a fight, there's the ref is in the middle holding up the hands of 2 fighters. It's a lot of different levels that this could be played out on. But I think that the greatest message, the symbol is, even though, you all have the same job and did quote unquote technically did the same thing. The rule is different when it comes down to punishment and what's allowable. So for whatever reason, she can participate and even be named with you all, can even be put up for expulsion with you all. But for whatever reason, some say it's race-based. I put some money on that bet. And some say that it's because of the technicalities. I put money on that bet too. And she had a lawyer. I definitely put money on that bet, that the rules are different in the end. So even though you're a legislator, you still need to stay in your place.
Mm-hmm. So if, look at, or help me, I'm going to ask you to analyze this from your position as a expert on personality and the psychology of personality. How would you describe the two Justins? I think you mentioned before the show, you write about in your book, maybe hold your book up and tell people about it, the personality types in the community and in leadership. Talk about that, and then put this story in the context of your teaching, your learning.
Okay, yeah. So, personality is, by definition, is a relatively stable and consistent set of traits and characteristics that an individual presents. And it's a steady way of engaging the world, right? And so a person who is outgoing is typically going to be outgoing the majority of the time you engage that person, even if it's more low key in certain contexts. A shy person is going to typically be shy. So it's saying it's relatively consistent and stable across context, across time, and situation, unless something happens, right, that causes that shift. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, I wrote a book called Practical Psychology 101. And it's a psychological manual for Black Lives Matter and all other social justice movements. And I actually wrote the book, watching some of the protests taking place. It was the ones taking place in North Carolina. And, I was watching the news. And, they had the helicopter view of the protesters walking through downtown. I think we were in Charlotte. and I realized like there were barricades to where the protesters were actually being led down a predetermined path. Mm-hmm. And I saw it because we had the bird's eye view of the helicopter. But I was wondering if the people on the ground realized how controlled their quote unquote protest actually was. Mm-hmm. Like, did they actually believe that they were going where they wanted to go, doing what they wanted to do? When in reality, it was all being manipulated and they were being guided and directed like rats in a maze almost. And so that was one of the first things that, like I said earlier, I talk back to the TV when I'm watching stuff like this. Like I was talking to Justin, Representative Pearson and Jones so much on that TV, man. I wish they could have heard me, brother. But so I'm talking to the protesters and I thought about it. I sat back and then, of course, Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore. And so, we went to Ground Zero, Dr. Wimbush and I. And, I'm watching and I'm looking at what's happening on the scene. And I saw two guys laying in the cut. They had on T-shirts, and then you can see like something bulky under the T-shirt. I was like, he's got on body armor. Mm-hmm. And so I said, Wimbush, that guy over there got on body armor. I said, I'm gonna go talk to him. There's a young white guy. And he's like, what? And so I went over and talked to him. And I said, hey man, I said, you over here working security or something? He just looked at me and said, well, something like that. I said, okay. I said, I noticed your body armor under your shirt. And that caught my attention. He kind of was shocked that I would even recognize it. Mm-hmm. And so, as I'm looking, I'm saying, you know what, we need something for the everyday person to become more aware of the psychological tools that we have to use, especially during times of civil unrest. And so if you're going to be a part of social justice movements. And so what I did is I wrote the book and I took 5 areas of psychology, took personality, consciousness, watch me mess up. Let me do it like yeah. In a minute, so I wrote. I was going to try to go off the top of my head. So I looked at social justice. Of course, I did consciousness. I did emotions. I did personality. I think I might already said that. And then psychology are applicable to the social justice movement. And so, speaking specifically on the area of personality, we get in these movements and we're oftentimes assigned roles. We join movements because they might be popular. We join movements because it might be convenient, mm-hmm. And I don't think that the average person considers what their own personality type is and how well it fits with the particular movement that they're joining. So we have some people who have a more fiery personality type, so they might be better fit for, the more assertive, the more aggressive, the more in your face, protest styles and movements. Whereas some people are just really like very cerebral. And very, they're very thoughtful, very loquacious. They have a good, ability to use their words. So that person might be one that might want to write through the literature. They might want to make, publication their form of protest. But I don't think that we think about those. And then the other piece is that oftentimes we don't consider the personality of the leadership as well. And so, when you're looking at what's happening right now, and when I was looking at, Brother Justin Jones, when I looked at Brother Justin Pearson, when they were at the mics and at the podiums, I started, and I've seen people post about this. They were saying, wow, they was reminiscent of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, And what I noticed is that both brothers they turned it to like a very churchical type of speech. It almost sounded like Baptist ministers at the podium. And so I asked one of my elders, I texted him and said, hey, does he usually talk like that? But what I understood is that it was a performance at a certain level. And so it could be, he could have been totally sincere about that. He could have literally been moved into that type of presentation. But for anybody that's paying attention on the outside, it seems performative. And we've got to be very, very careful with that, because it's not only us that's watching, and the majority of us, when I say us and then Black people, the majority of us watching, we might just be caught up in the emotion as well. Like, help protect these young brothers. We've been doing this too long. I mean, there was a picture of the two Olympians with the Black Power fist up side by side with a picture of Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, said same fight, different decade. And it's like, yeah, so we get caught up in it and maybe swept away with the emotions, and we might lose sight of the necessity of a strategy that says, hey, that could actually bring into question, the sincerity of what you're saying. That could actually make other people not take us as serious, because if you're imitating Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated and who was moving the way he was moving, during the 50s and the 60s, what place does that have in 2023? How have we evolved our approach to social justice? How have we advanced our strategies? We're talking good trouble. I say, yeah, let's talk good trouble. But what did good brother Lewis, what did he mean when he said good trouble? And how do we play out good trouble now in 2023 in a very strategic way? See, I love Fisk University, bro. I mean, that's my alma mater. I mean, it refined me so much. I'm alive today because of Fisk. There's no question in my mind about that. I've met so many beautiful people, wonderful people, my classmates, my peers, people that were my professors. Congressman John Conyers. I mean, when I was at Fisk as a student, I worked at the Race Relations Institute with Dr. Wimbush. And so I would go and pick up the people that were coming to campus. So if it was Dr. Dorothy Height was coming to campus, or if it was Archbishop Tutu coming to campus, Dr. Wells had coming to campus, Chuck D, whoever it was, I was over transportation. I would pick them up, and whatever they wanted to do in town, I took them there, brought them to and from campus, all that stuff. So I was able to refine myself in that process. And I learned so much, so much. And one of the number one things I learned from Dr. Welsing and Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. is that you've got to understand the system that you're functioning in, and you've got to act accordingly. And one of Mr. Fuller's most famous sayings is this. He says, if you don't understand racism and white supremacy is and how it functions, I think you understand will only confuse you. And so what I'm seeing is that we're walking into this situation, not really understanding the situation we're walking in. And we're carrying it as if it's lighter than what it is, when in actuality, this is very heavy. We need the two Justins in the Tennessee state legislature, right? We need them there. We don't need them carrying themselves in a way where they could get put out within 3 months, because the citizens, of course, can vote them back in. I mean, the council can vote them back in, and they likely will. But what does being back in there now look like for them, right? They thought there was a target before, but now there might be a greater target. Now there might be more instances of passive aggressiveness, and so I just want us to get very strategic about how we operate, how we function, and how we're looking at this. I think that it's a prime time for Fisk as a university to elevate our political science program, because that's what Justin came through. He came through the political science program, if I'm not mistaken. We can elevate that. We can begin through our Center for Social Justice, the John Lewis Center for Social Justice, set up community certificate programs and social justice leadership. Let's use this as a teachable moment and an opportunity to revise and refine the way that we're approaching social justice. Take the best from the past, integrate it with the best of right now, and come up with a new program. Carter G. Woodson talked about it in The Miseducation of the Negro. He talked about the new program, and how we can't keep doing things the same way that we used to do them, especially if the way that we used to do them didn't prove successful, right? Because we're still in the same fight, which means that what we did before didn't work, actually.
Well, or that it's not done. Maybe it did work, maybe it is working, but it's simply not done, depending on what how we view. I mean, my question, Doc, is what do you think was in their mind? Are they focusing on the protest du jour around the specific, tragedy of the loss of children's and adults' lives, and the public angst about the inability of Tennessee and the country to address that? Or are they looking at the larger, broader, more expansive ebb and flow of change in history? Do you think that they have approached taking the positions they took, fully aware of the consequence they'd be expelled, right? And with that expulsion, creating a different level of conversation that they could not have if they had simply remained in their seats and remained in alignment with the decorum, the rules of the game. I mean, it seems to me they had to be aware of the rules. They wouldn't have gotten there that far if they hadn't been. But what about that? Is there an argument that they can make, or that someone can make, that says at some point in time, what the rules are, what the plan is, and you move anyway? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that if that was an intentional strategy, all for it. But I think that if they were shocked that they got put up for expulsion and then expelled, then I think that they might have missed it. They missed something along the way. And I don't know necessarily what they were thinking, but what I do know is that right now there's more conversation about them being the Tennessee Three and not the three babies that were killed. So if I was any one of those so-called Tennessee Threes, I would say we are not the Tennessee Three. The Tennessee Three are those 3 9-year-old babies that got killed.
Good point.
You want to know the other Tennessee Three? The 3 60-year-olds that were killed. Mm-hmm. Those are the Tennessee Three. I would shift the spotlight off of me and put it back where it needs to be.
Right.
But that's a part of the catch-22, is that you get the cameras, you get the momentum, you get the people behind you, and then next thing you know, you look up and you're doing interviews all over the place, and you're talking about the expulsion, you're talking about the injustice of, the losing of democracy and all this other type of stuff, and we still ain't making any movements on gun control and gun reform, right? The conversation has been spun into a whole nother direction. And I think that we're missing the point.
Is there an argument that says that the position they took, that they're taking, has power to galvanize that progressive voice, that demographic voice, young people nationwide or global? And again, because of such, therefore, a sacrifice worth making. At the same time, that's not why they were elected, to make sacrifices, right? They were elected to go serve the 67,000 and the 70,000 people in their districts, right? So unpack that.
Yeah, and I absolutely, sacrifices happen all the time. Sometimes people will sacrifice hanging out at the club to be a better parent. So I mean, it's different levels of sacrifice. Some people literally sacrifice their lives, their relationships with their families, the ability to be a good father, a good mother to their children, to work and make sure that they can bring food home, So it's all levels of sacrifice, and usually sacrifice does yield some type of result on some level. And in this case, yes, they are galvanizing the voices of the future, right? Definitely doing that. But what's the model being set for those young people being galvanized right now? Everybody that stood up in their balcony, those young children that were there for the protest, witnessed the legislators on the floor behaving very similar to them. And that's not negative judgment. I'm speaking against the two brothers. They're passionate. They did what they felt they needed to do in the moment. I'm not negatively criticizing them. But what I am saying is that if they could have heard me as I was talking to the TV, Justin, make sure they could tell the difference between you and them. Make sure that the children up there look down at you and say, wow, these brothers are here and they're carrying themselves in a very disciplined and a very direct and focused way. They got us in here. They're supporting us. We should be able to see you all as leadership that's distinguishable between those that you're leading, right? Even though we come from the people that we're leading, the best leaders rise from amongst the people, but you should still be able to distinguish the two. And I think that being caught up in the passion, the way that they were, and rightfully so, we don't know what it's like to be standing in the room, in Nashville, Tennessee, with all these legislators, the majority of which are old white men who may or may not have participated in some form of racism at some point. There's a lot of pressure there. You naturally, psychologically, would go into a fight or flight state because that's a very threatening environment. Kind of like when you get pulled over on the road by white police officers and they got their hand on their gun. That is a very threatening situation, and psychologically, your systems kick in and you go into fight or flight mode. That's why people run. They're not running because they're bad people most of the time. They're running because they are afraid for their lives, right? And when people are afraid for their lives, the conscious part of their mind, the intellectual part, shuts down, and so they might have gone into fight or flight mode. Who knows? Because that can be a very threatening and intimidating environment that the majority of us have never been in. But again, yes, mobilize, galvanize the youth, right? Push for being disruptive. But before all of that, be strategic. We have to have strategy because this is war, and it's war on a different front, And so we got to understand that you agreed to rules, abide by those rules. And that's not selling out. That's being smart. Check it out. Shame on me, Al, if I came on your show and you told me that I can't cuss. And I said, okay, and I agreed to not cuss on your show. And then as soon as first 5 seconds, first 3 words out my mouth was all cuss words. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, we got to go. We can't have Dr. Menzise on here today. Sorry about that, y'all. You carry the show by yourself, which would be great still. But shame on me for doing that. And so there is a level of accountability, and it's very much a teachable moment for us, to learn like, yep, we got this, brothers. We got y'all in there. Now, when you get voted back in, don't make the same mistake.
Right. Do you think they can be effective in the future? Let's presume they both get voted back in because their districts will send them. And I think, as I am reading or hearing it, that if the districts send them, they can't be expelled again. There was a question, though, from one of the Justins about the Speaker of the House or the President of the Legislature saying that you cannot come back during this session. This session has expelled you. And even if your people send you back, your next availability will be the next section, which is 2024. That's what I think I heard on one of the news reports. So the question is, having gone through this moment of crisis and confrontation, what is the path to being effective, even if they are returned and allowed to return? What can they do? They still have just 2 votes, and the configuration of power in the body is the same. Is their work then to simply work in the area of advancing ideas that won't prevail because of the voting power, but have value simply because they are heard or advanced? Or is their work to figure out how to do some horse trading, where it's incremental, inch by inch? When you figure out ways to, quiet as is kept, white people can be divided as well, and they compete. And sometimes our strategy has to be to see where Group A is and where Group B is, and to negotiate something for ourselves, our interest, in aligning with one or the other. What do you think?
I think that let's say if they are rendered impotent on the floor, right? Let's say if they have been muted for all intents and purposes, they, are there, but they're basically not there, right? I think that it's very opportune for this. It's an opportune time for them to pivot and to engage the citizens more. I would shift and start doing more community-based education. They could they got the spotlight. I mean, they've got the ear of the White House at this point. And so I would utilize that as much as possible to start educating citizens on political strategy, on ethical leadership, on social justice points. All of those children that came down to protest, man, I would have, if I was at Fisk right now, if I was running the center, the John Lewis Center, I would have a community certificate program ready to roll out May 1st. And I would have Justin Jones, Fiskite extraordinaire, Tennessee legislator, as long as it's not a conflict of interest with the rules of engagement when he's admitted back into the House, he would be one of our key instructors. I would bring the elders from the Nashville community into there to also teach. And it would be I could pivot that into a summer camp to bring in all of the youth that came down for the protest to come in and learn civic engagement, right? learn the various strategies, the various methodologies, the various theories of engaging, learn from the history of Fisk as an institute that has always stood for social justice. I mean, this is just prime, so regardless of what they do on the floor, let them do what they're going to do. Vote these brothers back in, but it's for these brothers and for those of us that are supporting them to step up now and use all of this attention, use all of this momentum to really educate the citizens, because an educated population is a dangerous population. That's where your change is going to come. When we move past being emotional and doing things for the gram and getting our pictures taken and all that type of stuff, once we get past that and we continue with the same momentum, whether the camera is on or not, we're going to see something different in the next 6 months. And we got a presidential election coming up, and many states are preparing for that right now too. And so we will have a whole different citizenship when it comes down to it, if we use this opportunity the way that I think that we should.
Dr. Menzise, let me ask you, you mentioned that Fisk University saved your life. Let me talk about you for a minute. What's your personal story? How did you come to Fisk, but how did you really come into the world as a young person, as a human being? You're from Cincinnati, I believe.
Yep.
And what is the background, the lineage and the environment that created you and the opportunities that you have pursued and the work that you have undertaken that brings you to this moment?
Wow. So yeah, I appreciate that question, brother. So yeah, born and raised in Cincinnati, inner city, raised by my mother, sister, my aunts, my grandmother. Father was, he was present a little bit earlier in my life, but basically raised by a single mother, inner city. Was in the hood, but wasn't the hoodest of hood. I was hood, but wasn't the most hood of the most other hood people. So, but I did what I did. I was raised the way that I was. I engaged the environment the way that I did for survival purposes most of the time. Fast forward a bit, got kicked out of middle school. We used to fight like almost every day. And it was like friendly fights. We had class wars or whatever. Got put out of the school. It was a magnet school. And ended up going to a private school because I also failed U.S. history that year, ironically, because we learned in U.S. history about, the teacher taught about the Electoral College that year. And when I learned about the Electoral College, and I learned how it's the state elect who give the votes, and that's how presidents are chosen, the teacher couldn't make it make sense to me. I couldn't equate that with democracy, right? I couldn't, when it wasn't a popular vote, it's the Electoral College votes that actually select the president. And so I dropped out mentally that year from U.S. history, and I just never engaged again. So I was failing that, had to go to summer school that summer to pass history. And ironically, I went to Atlanta instead. I went down there and hung with my cousin for something. So anyway, long story short, came back, ended up at a private school, which also changed my life. Wore uniforms. It was majority Black private school. It was Catholic school. So, went there, whatever. And then one of my really good friends, she scored in the top 1% of the ACT that year. And so she was going to Mellon. She's going to Carnegie Mellon, chemistry full ride. And so she came to me one day. I was at my locker, and she handed me an application to Fisk. She said, "Jeff," she said, "you could do much better than what you're doing." She said, "I think this would be good for you." She handed me the application. I looked at it, and it said Fisk on there. And I said, "Yes, all right." I trusted her. I said, "Angie, I'll go to Fisk. That's cool." So I filled out the application.
She's a peer, right? She's a peer of yours, student.
My classmate. Yeah, she was my classmate.
Yeah.
We were in AP. I was in AP Math and Sciences. I was clowning, so I just did enough to get by, really. But yeah, so my classmate, she just concerned for me, genuinely concerned, knew I could do better. Gave me my Fisk application. I filled it out, and I never looked back. Got to Fisk. And my life changed. I mean, I moved a couple of my boys down with me from Cincinnati. That's how I was like, "Y'all coming with me," and they did. And got there, and I was a biology major because I was intending to be a pediatrician.
Okay.
And so, long story short, took a course from Dr. Ray Wimbush, who had just came over from Vanderbilt to run the race relations. He was there to reopen the Race Relations Institute. It was under President Ponder. It was during the Ponder years at Fisk, and I took a course from him called the Psychology of Adjustment. It was an elective. And he made a statement that year. He said, "If you free your mind, then the rest will follow." And I was like, wow, that was pretty profound to me. I was like, my mind wants to be free. So let me switch my major. So I switched from biology to psychology that very next semester. And I never looked back. And I started working at the Race Relations Institute as a student. I went from sagging my pants to pulling them up because he had me being responsible for picking up all of the VIP guests that were coming to campus. And these were some giants, man. I mean, these were giants. I mean, just all walks of life. We had a summer institutes for the Race Relations Institute where we would bring Richard Wright's daughter to campus, Julia Wright. We brought Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois' son, David Du Bois, to campus. We brought Kwame Nkrumah's son, Gamal Nkrumah, to campus. I mean, these are just international giants, man. And I was responsible for the most part of transporting them back and forth. Jazz drummer Max Roach, just all kind of people. And I'm sitting in here one time, I had a van full of people, all of them top shelf VIP, and they're just conversing. And I'm like a fly on the wall. I'm just listening to this stuff.
You in the middle of it, man. Yeah.
Oh my God. And it's just refining me, and I'm just learning more. And I finally dropped the identity of being an N-word. I used to think I was an N-word. I dressed like they told us we supposed to. I talked like they told us we supposed to. All of that stuff. And it just all shifted for me, man. And I went to Africa. Wimbush sent me to Africa twice.
Where'd you go?
I went to Gambia first for a study abroad trip with Austin Peay State University and a couple other universities. And then the second time I went to Ghana, I actually set up a study abroad trip for the Race Relations Institute. We went to Ghana. And so it just really opened my eyes. Ended up working with the Ministries of Education over there. And from there, I went to Howard to get my PhD in clinical psychology. And I mean, that whole nother transformation at the Mecca. You're up there in Chocolate City, DC. I mean, my professors there were so wonderful and beautiful, man. And so did more international work, got more rooted in the community, and started doing DC is a very political district. It's a very political city. All levels of security, all levels of politics. So all of that's happening. And so I'm just constantly growing and developing. I intentionally jumped into a self-development program and learned more about African spirituality. So I dove head first into that without apology. So while I'm doing my PhD classes during the daytime at Howard, at night I'm studying, African spiritual traditions and African culture, with the local organization. And so all of that, in a nutshell, helps to culminate to bring forward, who you have here talking with you today. And I'm forever thankful, for everybody who's taught me something good, something bad throughout life, because it makes me who I am today.
You mentioned your mom and the guidance and support she gave you. What about your parents? What role did they play in your life? And you've been to Africa. What is the notion of being an African, or an African in the West, or an African in the New World mean to you?
Yeah. So you said my parents' parents?
Yeah, your
my grandparents.
Yeah. And have you chosen to do your own genealogy, or is that important to you or not?
Yeah. Yep. So a typical African American family. We could go a couple generations back. We could go back to great grandma. I could for a long time. That's as far back as I could go. Then I found out what my great grandmother's maternal great grandmother's parents' names were. And as an adult, I came back to went to Cincinnati at the Freedom Center, the Underground Railroad. They have a place where you can, dig into the archives, the old census, and I found them, and I started digging a little further. But ironically, while I was teaching at Fisk and running the Race Relations Institute as his assistant director, I got a call one day that this Black genealogy company they were coming to town, but they needed assistance hosting and da. But yeah, come on in. And so, it happened to be African ancestry with Dr. Gina Page, so she came down, and at the time in Nashville, we had a Queen Mother Council. I said, Gina Page, it'd be wonderful if we can get all of the Queen Mothers, their testing done, so we can find out what their lineage is, and then reveal it to the entire Nashville community, because that's what this is. So I booked the Appleton Room in Jubilee Hall at Fisk, and Gina Page came down, and we had the Queen Mothers there on stage and all their lineage and their children, and it was just total unveiling. And so I did mine as well. And then Gina Page, now we became really good friends, and then so when I moved back to DC or Baltimore to work at Howard, she was at Morgan, she was very instrumental in helping, support me when I was there. So she got a wonderful family as well. So yes, I've done the African ancestry. And it's a very powerful unveiling. And then she's since then has hooked up with Tony Browder, and they've done a lot of work in Kemet or Egypt, where he's unearthing various sites and things of that nature. But self knowledge, to tie this all into what we're talking about now, having the confidence that self knowledge brings to you, is one of the things that I would definitely infuse into all of the students that are interested in engaging. in social justice movements or whatever your discipline is, but definitely when you're out here out front, if you got a solid sense of self, right, and you have that confidence that brings you, and it also gives you a sense of value. You start to value yourself more, which means that you're not going to participate in certain things. You're going to be a lot more careful with yourself. When you're walking into a space like that, you can definitely move mountains at it, a lot less effort than if you went in confused and less stable.
Interesting. So what about your vision for the future? What do you see for yourself, number one, but our people, number two? And when I ask the question, I always am intending that when I say our people, I'm really talking about humanity, human beings. And so how do you see both the learning, the genealogy, the work you're doing now, the times we're in, all pouring into and helping you shape both vision and work to achieve the vision for the future that I believe you would say you and we must be co-authors of? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we have to be very, very strategic and intentional about how we socialize our children, especially nowadays, because that's what our children sound. To risk sounding cliche, the children are our future. And right now, they're so technologically engaged. They probably spend more time looking at screens than they do looking at another human face to face these days. Mm-hmm. And I think that what happens when you spend a lot of time, that amount of time doing that, is that you start to lose a bit of your humanness, right? And we start to connect with each other differently. And with the way that technology is moving right now, where the line between reality and fantasy is constantly being blurred and almost erased at this point, with the advent of artificial intelligence creating art, whether it be musical art. I did a guest lecture at Howard the other day in Race and Racism with Dr. Harrell, and I talked about music, psychology of music. And I played for them a song that artificial intelligence not only wrote, but it also produced the beat and it performed it. And one of the prompts was to create a song that sounds like Jay-Z, Kendrick Lamar, and that DJ Premier produced it. And this whole song came together totally created by artificial intelligence. And you can hardly tell the difference. You can hardly tell that it's not Jay-Z. And so with that, and then you have the AI where they can write papers, write grant proposals, write scripts for movies, write novels. So all of these things, they create these images that you can't hardly tell if these are real images. One of the keys, though, is that you look at the hands. AI is having trouble developing hands right now. So that's one way that you would identify that it's AI sometimes. But I think that because that's the direction that the future is going, we're not going to stop that, short of some type of technological crash. But it's going in that direction. So I think it's more important now than ever for us to socialize our children, to maintain some level of humanity, some level of connection with each other, some level of connection with nature. Because if we're not careful, they're going to get some contacts. They're going to get these goggles they're going to put on, and they would never see natural sunlight again if we're not careful. And I know that sounds kind of trippy, but 15, 20 years down the road, that's possible.
So what would it mean though? What would be the upside of that? What would be the downside? What if humanity moves in that direction with AI? And is there a path for the Black world? And again, for me, when I say the Black world, I'm really talking about the whole planet, because that's where I stand in the planet. Is there a path for fulfillment, completion, enlightenment, for a quality of life that maybe at this moment still be unimagined because we didn't have the tools and technology to attain that level of consciousness and engagement that may be different from what we have had in the course of humanity up to now? What if the change is that radical? What do we do with that? And should we be thinking about how do we move the change forward in ways that we intentionally have captured and reflected and maintained what we believe to be our interest as human beings, as Africans? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that yes, what you're saying is, it's absolutely, those are very important questions and concepts and ideas to ponder. And what typically happens with us as, Black people, modern times, is that we are bottom heavy as far as being consumers of much of the things that are being introduced to human beings, like whether it be technologically or, we're talking about, media or entertainment, we're typically make a large percentage of our population end up being consumers. But at the same time, there are always us at the top as well that are the people that actually invented the technology, allowed for this technological surge to come, right? So, like the invention of the internet or the microchip, or even the mining of the mineral resources that are required for the tech to be constructed. So it's a very interesting, distribution of us when it comes to these things. But I think that your question about, is it a good thing? Basically, is it a good thing, bad thing for who? For the consumers, this movement, I think, is going to disconnect us further from nature and reality and put us into this quote unquote virtual reality. Okay. But for those who remain on the outside of that, who understand that there is a clear distinction between that world in there, the metaverse, the meta world, and this world out here, the natural world, those that remain on the outside and understand there's an inside and the outside, they're going to benefit greatly from this. It's almost like being in a space where everybody around you is asleep and knocked out, and you're still free to move about and do everything that you want to do, and you don't have to worry about them anymore. And I think that that's possible.
Yeah, we're down to our last couple of minutes. I wanted to bring this back around to Justin. And I was trying to figure out where, given this conversation, we position or see them as young people, 28, under 30 years old, and whether we see them as attached to legacy, to community, to a specific heritage and lineage and knowledge base, a way of knowing, or do we see them operating through maybe more through a demographic metaverse kind of assembly of the world?
Yeah, I think that they are definitely a part of a legacy. Justin Jones having gone to Fisk, and if I'm not mistaken, Justin Pearson went to Howard. So both of those are very, very strong traditions. As far as I would never have a concern for either one of them being lost in the shuffle, because they got too strong of legacies within their HBCU collectives. One, and then the other part is that they're also part of the lineage of Black legislators, here in the United States, and that's a whole nother tradition. And so both of those traditions span back, hundreds of years, and not only that, but they both have collectives of elders that are still present today. And so they're very much in touch with those lineages. Yes, sir.
Dr. Jeff Menzise, thank you so much for this conversation. So good to meet you. A wonderful conversation. I want to bring you back and just have more conversation into elements of who we are and where we're going. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Thank you.